Hi, everyone. My name is Sami Awad. I'm a Palestinian, I'm an activist, and I'm author of the book, The Sacred Awakening Reclaiming Christ Consciousness. And welcome to another episode on the Sacred Awakening channel. One of the questions that I carried for years about the teachings of Jesus was on the concept of forgiveness. I've heard countless sermons growing up where I was told that Jesus wants us to forgive because we've been forgiven. God forgave us our sins. Jesus died on the cross to forgive us our sins. And that forgiveness is what it means to simply be a good Christian. But something about that never fully satisfied me, partly because the behavior I witnessed, especially from many Christians, looked nothing like forgiveness. And even when people did forgive, there was often something beneath it that didn't sit right for me. A subtle sense of, look how good I am for forgiving you. It felt like forgiveness had become another spiritual achievement, another thing to check off your list. Now, of course, I know forgiveness is good, but on a deeper level, everything changed when I began seeing the concept of forgiveness through the lens of kingdom consciousness, the thing that Jesus was teaching day in and day out as he lived on this earth. And the shift brought me back to a very familiar passage, one that I've heard countless times, I'm sure you have as well, but never really understood it. And it's the conversation between Peter and Jesus. Peter asks Jesus, Lord, Rabbi, teacher, how many times should I forgive my brother and my sister? Up to 7 times? Jesus replies, not 7 times, 70 times 7. Now, honestly, that always frustrated me. And what frustrated me even more was how the teaching was often used to shame people, another religious obligation. And so for years, growing up again in a Christian setting, I assumed Jesus was simply increasing the number. Peter says 7, Jesus says 490 times. End of story. Good luck. But what if we actually misunderstood the conversation? What if Peter and Jesus were using the same word, forgiveness, but talking about two completely different realities of that word? Peter, for example, could be using the word as a transactional question. How many times do I have to do this? When is enough enough? Jesus responds with a transformational invitation. It's almost as if he's saying, Peter, before we talk about how many times, we first need to understand what forgiveness actually is. So Peter is asking, how many times must I forgive? Jesus is asking, what kind of forgiveness has the power of transformation? Those are two completely different questions and two completely different realities. Actually, maybe that's why Jesus gives Peter such a large number, not because he's asking him to endlessly tolerate harmful behavior, but because Peter may need to practice his way of forgiveness enough times until he discovers that it's not working. So maybe after the seventh time, he walks away. Maybe if he stays in it after the 10th time, he still feels that he has to forgive out of obligation. Maybe after 50 times, he feels morally superior. And maybe after 100 times, he still hopes the other person feels some sort of gratitude to him. And eventually he'll realize that although he's been forgiving, nothing essentially has changed. Maybe his understanding of forgiveness is what needs to be transformed. Forgiveness is an opportunity to transform the self and to transform the other. And then actually, Jesus moves to a parable, the parable of the unforgiving servant. And the story goes about a servant who owes the king an unimaginable debt. The king forgives everything, no conditions, no repayment, no humiliation. Yet the servant, immediately after he leaves the presence of the king, demands repayment from someone who owes him almost nothing. He experienced forgiveness, but nothing inside him changed. And this is actually the heart of the story. The king wasn't simply canceling a debt, he was opening up a possibility for a different way of living. But the servant couldn't enter that possibility. He returned to the only consciousness he knew, the consciousness of debt, the consciousness of fear, the consciousness of transaction, the consciousness of power. And then the story actually takes an unexpected turn. The king hands the servant over to the prison to be punished. Now, for years, that part confused me. Was Jesus saying that If we don't forgive, then the forgiveness will be taken away from us? Or was he describing what happens when we cannot leave the consciousness of this world? So the bottom line is this: the possibility of freedom had been opened for you, but the servant returned to the prison he already knew, to the consciousness he already knew. Perhaps this is the tragedy. Not that forgiveness failed, but that transformation never happened. And I think that nowhere do we see transformational forgiveness more clearly happen than on the cross. Jesus looks at the people that are crucifying him and says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. That sentence has always captivated me. Jesus doesn't excuse the violence, he doesn't deny the injustice. Instead, he looks beneath it. This is the act of forgiveness. They do not know what they are doing. To me, that's not simply a statement of knowledge, it's a statement about consciousness itself, that they are acting from the prevailing consciousness, a consciousness rooted in fear of losing power, fear of losing identity, fear of the other, him, the kind of fear that always leads to control, leads to exclusion, leads to violence, leads to death. Jesus refuses to define them by their actions. He sees the consciousness from which their actions arise. And that's the place forgiveness becomes possible. Not because they deserve it, but because he sees something deeper than their behavior. He sees human beings trapped in fear, unable to recognize the possibility that they are destroying in front of their eyes. That to me is transformational forgiveness, not ignoring the wound, but seeing beyond it. This doesn't mean we ignore injustice. It doesn't mean we remain in abusive relationship. Love actually creates needed boundaries. Wisdom creates safe distance. Forgiveness is not the absence of discernment. It is a different way of seeing. This is the whole point of the teachings of Jesus. Look with new eyes, listen with new ears. Perhaps this is what kingdom consciousness looks like. Not simply forgiving more often, but seeing people through the eyes of transformation than through the eyes of transaction. So today I find myself asking a different question. Has my forgiveness changed me? Has it become an invitation for me to enter into another consciousness? Has it opened the door through which another human being might glimpse that another way of being is possible? Of course, I cannot make that happen. Their response will be their own decision. But I can ask whether my forgiveness became a sacred encounter with them or merely another transaction. Maybe we've actually spent thousands of years trying to answer Peter's question, arguing Peter's point of view, while Jesus was inviting us into his. Not how many times should I forgive, but what kind of forgiveness has the power to transform? Because I believe that's the forgiveness that Jesus lived, and I wonder if that's the forgiveness our world is still waiting to experience.